Russia had a major intelligence failure, inappropriate weapons, and didn't send enough force. His final problem is that he's had to dragoon, I won't call, not subscription, dragoon an army. He's out of an army. The one problem that he has is training an army. It's one thing having them in your camp. How do you train the infantrymen? I think it would take about 6 months before someone goes through AIT. The Russians are going to send completely untrained troops into combat. Well, no, they're not. But they've done this because they had to. The basic weakness of the Russian army is a lack of sergeants. What I mean by this is the Chinese have sergeants. The British, God knows, have sergeants. Scary. The Americans, I can tell you a story about Fort Bragg, but it wasn't pretty. We have trainers. We have experienced forces who have been in combat, hopefully, but even if they haven't, they understand the basic principles of tactical warfare. And for 3 months, it's pounded into their heads till they never want to think of that day again. The Russians do not have sergeants. They have lieutenants who have been in 6 months, who are assigned to train people who have been there no months. This is why the Russian army performs badly. It has never had a coherent training program. Why? Because in World War II, they didn't have the time for it. And because they didn't have the time for it, they sent them in to die. And it was not kidding. The best they could do to hold the Russians, to hold the Germans, I should say, was hit them again, and take the casualties. This is a nuanced war, a complex war, choreographed by the Americans. I won't say that the Pentagon has a lot to do with planning, but what the hell. This is planned for it. It's with a force that's highly motivated, totally committed, and knows that it has the United States back and the British at its back. Even the Germans at its back, but they you don't trust. So this is the problem of the Germans. It's not clear how the Russians can win. Russia has to have a peace treaty because its option is nuclear war or a peace settlement. It cannot win. Its forces are not in a position to win. They can take them in, they can spend all winter training them, and that may have some effect, but basically they have an untrained force fighting a highly motivated force backed up by the superb technologies that are available today. So, this is the Russian situation. The Russians have a ground problem. It's a battle problem of the infantry. The Chinese problem is a naval problem. Yes, I know they go all the way back to Tibet and everything. Their problem is a naval problem. They are boxed in by the South China Sea. But there's a different problem, which is China has had a massive economic downturn, and everybody's waiting for it to improve, but it won't. And this is the critical thing about China. The United States was China in 1900. We had the Civil War. It was a disaster. We got low wages. We exported like crazy. And by the time of 1900, we produced 1/2 of all the industrial goods in the world. And everybody said they were going to take over the world, to which the answer was, not yet. Because what happened was Europe had one of its wars. They came out of it unable to consume our products. They couldn't take the exports that they had planned before. The United States had a financial crisis that turned into the Great Depression in 1929. Japan was in a very similar situation. Hiroshima, Nagasaki had not done any good to its morale. It was a disaster. What happened was the Korean War. The United States during the Korean War had to get hold of trucks, maybe 100, 200. Because sending back to Detroit would be ridiculous. So I went to a little company in Japan and says, can you build a tank? They said, oh, no problem, build a tank. The name of the company was Toyota. And that was how Toyota began. And the next thing Toyota did was swamp the American market with inexpensive cars, undercutting the American market. And Japan soared with all these exports coming into hungry markets. And Japan looked like we were all going to be speaking Japanese, standing around holding hands and having quality corners and everything like that. Movies were made about how Japan was taking us over. And then what happened was that Japan ran out of customers. A lot of customers, like the Americans, said, cut it out, you're killing our auto industry. We're not buying anymore. Other countries pushed back in this way, that way. And what happened to Japan in 1991, it collapsed. Its economy collapsed. Now, the United States is crazy, but it holds together. The Japanese are crazy and never go apart. Now we get to China. China had one of the most extraordinary economic explosions in history, on the order of the American and the Japanese. So we've seen this before. And this is the basic problem of export-oriented economies. You can say, wow, they've taken over a country and everything else. No, what's going to happen is they run out of room to grow. Countries like the United States block their exports. They go down. So when Japan happened to Japan a couple of years ago, it went into a nosedive. China went into a nosedive. It went into an economic nosedive that it can't recover from because its economy is based on powerful exports and Western investment in its businesses. And that's not going to happen again because the rest of the world is also in recession, or about to be, whatever Biden decides we are. We're in this economic problem. We cannot float the Chinese, and therefore the Chinese are in deep trouble. Their problem is domestic. Their problem is that there are vast parts of China that never experienced growth. If you go to Shanghai and you drive 30 miles west of the city, you see poverty like you've never seen before. The coastal region that trades with the rest of the world does fine. The rest of the country really doesn't. And so we can say, because I'm an expert in this field, that Chinese people are really upset with poverty. Okay? I've studied this. And so what you have is a political crisis emerging. And in that political crisis emerging, the former president gets led out of the building by a horse. Why? Because he was a successful president, not because he personally, it's just he got at the right time. Xi can't admit that he's hosed, so he has to find somebody else. Poor Hu is let out of the room, and we won't see him again for a while, maybe. So what you have is China in tremendous trouble. Now the question comes up, will they invade Taiwan? What do they want with Taiwan? What problem will holding Taiwan solve? What does that do for you? It makes you feel good for a couple of days, but then everybody's out there. Plus, how do you invade Taiwan? Taiwan is an amphibious operation. And here I am at the Naval Institute, so I will not tell you how hard it is to conduct amphibious operations over a distance that takes you at least 9 hours to reach in mass force Taiwan.